Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be painting for you this lovely grey river scene taken from a screenshot of the River Chelmer in Essex, England. I'm working today from a screenshot I took as inspiration from a wonderful video on YouTube by a really great content creator, Mr. John Rogers, who goes for wonderful and inspiring walks all around England, particularly in the London borough areas. I will pop a link to his channel below if anybody is interested. I would absolutely recommend them. Since starting to watch them, I've become quite hooked. He's very knowledgeable and very kind, and I do so love to go out on walks but haven't been able to recently, so I find his videos a wonderful comfort. This is the screenshot. The details you can see at the top and bottom of where to find it. As I said, I'll pop a link below so you can go and check out his wonderful channel if you're inclined to. To start with, I'm creating a lovely pale grey sky for a gloomy winter's day. And to do that, rather than using a pre-mixed grey, I decided to create my own from a combination of Van Dyke Brown and Ultramarine Blue, which I've just mixed up on my palette, and it's created this lovely, dreary, but almost slightly grainy pale grey, which I'm putting in layers on the top part of my painting here. You can see I've taped off just a little above halfway so I can get this lovely crisp skyline without having to worry about splashing onto the lower part of the paper. I'm going to put a few clouds into this sky so I'm not worried about it being completely perfect and tonal. In fact, I want a little bit of colour differentiation. I'm enjoying this grey because the ultramarine is ever so slightly coming out of the brown where I've mixed it. You can just get that slight hint of blue, which isn't really blue, which works really well on a grey sky, I think. So now I'm just beginning to put in some clouds, just trying to make sure I get enough paint on my brush there. This is a synthetic mop brush that I'm using. You can see I'm just drifting it over the paper. Once I've got the right amount of paint in it, you can see just how quickly and easily those lovely simple clouds go in. I'm using wet on wet technique, so I'm doing this whilst that sky wash is still lovely and damp, and I'm able to put these colours in and have the edges soften and diffuse beautifully into that lovely grey sky, so that the clouds don't appear too sort of flat and blocky and as though they're just sitting on top of the sky. And all I'm doing now with this flat brush is using exactly the same combination of colours that I've mixed up. So it's the ultramarine and the Van Dyke Brown, and I'm putting in a little bit of background detail. Again, doing this nice and quickly whilst the sky is still wet, so these dark colours can start to diffuse around the edges into the sky. So we get a little bit of background tree or building work here, whatever the eye thinks it will be. And I'm using a clean, dry fan brush just to slightly soften the edges there, where it's not quite diffusing as much as I had hoped. That's a nice little trick there for anyone who needs it. It must be dry and it must be a clean brush though, but you can with care just pull the paint a little bit up, just encourage it upwards into the sky, into where it's a little bit wetter, and you get those lovely soft edges. So now this is what it looks like once the sky has dried. This top part is fully dry now, so I'm going to begin to work on the lower half of the painting, starting with this beautiful river that's reflecting the grey colour of the sky. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of clean paint water, just to start to get that mapped out where I want to put the colour in. And because I want to reflect this lovely grey sky we've created, I'm really not going to use a lot of colour for this. I'm going to take a very, very pale wash of the colour that's still on my palette from doing the sky and just begin to just stripe it into this river here. You can see I've marked out faintly in pencil where the water needs to be. And you can see I'm just using a fan brush to just dry brush really this river colour on now, not worrying about leaving any little bits of white paper showing through, because that always adds a little bit of extra sparkle, but just trying to get some nice lines and some nice soft grey colour into this water area here. If anyone is interested in the location, this is a stretch of the River Chelmer, which flows through the county of Essex in England, through Chelmsford to the River Blackwater near Malden. I've never been myself, sadly, but it's certainly from Mr. Rogers' videos, it looks to be a very beautiful spot. And now again with the fan brush, I'm using a similar dry brush technique. You can see I've got a little bit of paint on the brush, nice and rich. It's enough to make the bristles split out into the shape which gives this lovely textural lines on the land here, but not enough to completely saturate the paper when I put the brush onto it. So it's just finding that balance between having enough paint and not too much paint. And I'm dry brushing some Van Dyke Brown and some burnt sienna now onto this area of land here. Looking at the reference photo, there's a lovely rusty coloured bracken here, or some sort of foliage of some kind. So I'm just putting in a couple of different tones of brown, using the dry brush technique with the fan brush, leaving a little bit of white peeping through for colour and for texture and a little bit of interest. And now all I'm doing is using the fan brush again to put in a little bit of foliage along what will be the riverbank. And I'm going to do exactly the same technique again on this side, putting in a few sort of darker spots just for my own for my own brain to figure out where the darks need to be as I'm painting. I'm going to stuff in a little bit of a green colour here, following my photograph, because there's a lovely green field along that top line there. So I'm using sap green for that, which is lovely and bright. But then the rest I'm going to stuff in with some more darker colours. And again, just using that fan brush, I'm just holding it by the very tip and sort of wiggling it. I can't think of a more sensible way for what I'm doing, but yeah, wiggling it gleefully across the paper to get those nice dry brush marks. I think it's a really easy, simple and effective technique to get a little bit of detail into a loose landscape without it taking you hours and hours. And as you can see, I'm just using a little bit of paint spray now to put in some darks and to really get a nice little bit of contrast and to introduce a little bit of distance into these riverbanks here. And now this is a foliage brush. This is the Matthew Palmer Tree and Texture brush, large size, and all I'm doing is I've dunked it in a little bit of Payne's Grey and Van Dyke Brown, and I'm just using it to build up a little bit of tree texture over where I've put the soft diffused background right at the start. This is just giving it a little bit extra texture, a little bit of extra interest and detail, and just generally making it look a little bit more tree-ish. And now I'm just using it with a little bit of extra brown and a little bit of the burnt sienna as well to just begin to add more interest along these riverbanks. So now all I'm doing is using the fan brush again, sweeping upwards to start to introduce some loose, lovely reed beds along the banks of the river. This is the start of our nice sort of grassy, reedy texture that I'm going to be putting along the bank of the river. I'm starting this with quite a thin mix of paint because it's just going to be the backdrop for the main event, which I'm putting in now using my Pro Art sword liner brush, which is a wonderful little brush, but you could use any brush for this. A rigger or a round would do just as well. But I'm just using it here to slice in a few beautiful, elegant reeds coming out of this darker area, which is going to be a reed bed. I'm using the Payne's Grey and the brown again, and I'm going to do a few highlights in the burnt sienna just to keep the colour palette working nicely together. Also, just you can see adding those final darks, those lovely shadows that really make the bank of the river stand out quite cleanly from the water's edge. And now this is a lovely little trick here with the fan brush. I'm putting in the reflections. You can see I'm just holding it flat and then wiggling it down the paper where I want the reflections to be coming into the water from these reed beds. You see it leaves these lovely lines, these lovely spontaneous marks which look just like the reflections of a reed bed on the flowing surface of a river. So you can see here in the bottom left corner, I've used exactly the same technique that I've just showed you to rough in the furthermost land area, the foreground, exactly the same way that I've just showed you. I cut it out of the video because it was getting rather long, but I'm just going to show you now, popping in this lovely bare tree that's in the reference photo at this sort of mid-ground here. I'm using the sword liner, but again a round brush or a rigger brush, just something that comes to a nice fine point would work really well here. And all I'm doing is I'm using Payne's Grey. You of course could use a black or any other colour that's dark enough to stand out against this lovely landscape. And I've just put in a few branches and of course the dark strong line of the tree trunk, and now I'm just going in with very, very fine lines and trying to do little sort of wild spontaneous strokes to mimic the tree branches here, just filling out between those main branches. And of course it's on the riverbank, so we need to put the reflection in. Again, this trick with the fan brush. I'm sorry you can't see it super well, but you can see the mark that my brush is leaving there. This nice wiggled line that I'm doing quite carefully to try and make sure that I just imitate the shape of the tree, but inverted of course. And then just putting in a little hint of that strong dark tree trunk there in the reflection as well, pulling it down a little bit further, and then it's literally as easy as that. So in this foreground here you can see I've scrubbed in a little bit of land, leaving plenty of dry brush showing through. I've done a few thin reeds in a very pale wash of colour. So now all I'm doing here is going in, and I want to put in some quite bold and strong grasses here in the foreground to really zing out against this lovely pale backdrop. So I'm using Payne's Grey here. I'm going to use some Van Dyke Brown as well, and I'm going to add a few highlights with burnt sienna. I did contemplate putting a few greens in as well, but I didn't think it would work quite as well with how I wanted the brown and neutral tones to really stand out in this lovely landscape. I haven't got these reeds sketched out or anything. I'm just spontaneously putting them wherever my brush wherever my brush goes. There goes a reed or grass or some kind of beautiful skeletal winter foliage. And now all I'm doing is adding a little bit of extra strength to this foreground with the tree and texture brush, just dabbling in a little bit more of the Van Dyke Brown and Payne's Grey to just darken up this foreground and give the impression of a lovely clump of foliage where the reeds are sort of springing brightly out of the tumble of sort of bracken and brambles underneath. and if you find you end up putting a little bit too much water in, a little bit too much paint, all I did there was just scrunch up a little piece of tissue and just use it to quickly and cleanly dab out the excess water and excess paint. And now I'm using a fine brush to pop in our lovely little water birds that are in the reference photo. A little bit too far away for me to make out the exact species, some kind of moorhen or a coot or duck, perhaps. A little small for geese, so I'm gonna go with a duck. For this, I'm using my Masterstroke Pro Art Mini synthetic brush from the Series 60s range. Size 4/0, so very, very fine, really great for this fine detail work. And now for the finishing touch, I'm just adding in a few spontaneous birds into this beautiful grey sky. Now I know that if you look back at the reference photo, there aren't any flying birds in this scene. However, I do think you'll forgive me for taking the liberty of adding some here, because I think they just bring an extra little bit of life to this lovely grey sky. And I hope Mr. John Rogers doesn't mind either. With his very kind permission, he's allowed me to paint from his work, which is a pro tip for all artists out there. If you want to use somebody else's work as a reference for your own, then it's always best to ask permission first. And here we are with the finished painting. I'm really pleased with how this has come out. Just goes to show that a gloomy grey day can be just as beautiful as a bright and sunny one. So thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Please also feel free to check out John Rogers' channel, which I will link in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. So that's goodbye from me for now. Enjoy the rest of your day.